Welcome back to the Berry Chronicles. I apologize that it has been well over a month since I've put together a video or a blog. For those of you who do watch, I also have this in written form on my website, berrychronicles.com. But without further ado, I admit that prior to doing today's video and the next several that are going to come after, I had kind of reached an impasse about not necessarily knowing which direction to take this in because there is the part of the story that's obviously very interesting and entertaining to somebody who either is a part of this world or is just entertained and amused by the fact that they know somebody who is a part of this world like me. And so I had some real introspective thoughts, on this space. But as you guys are about to learn, the story kind of writes itself sometimes. And I say that with a degree of laughter. What I really appreciate about this is that for the first time since I've created these videos, you guys are actually experiencing something that's happening to me right now, to the point where the blog that I'm sharing today in video form, the information in it is no more than 2 weeks old, and I'm going to be working quickly to write and record the rest of the videos so that you're up to speed to exactly where I am. So you are not far behind. There's a little bit of a cliffhanger at the end of today, but I can assure you I don't have all the answers I'm looking for yet, but I do have some more information. So we're going to dive in. This one is Uncovering the Identity of My Donor, Part 5. In early September 2017, I rode my bike 4 short blocks to the Holocaust Memorial, Miami Beach. I'd lived near the intersection of 17th Street and Washington Avenue for 3 years, next to a synagogue, ironically, and drove past the haunting memorial and sculpture most days on my way to and from work. I eyed the outstretched hand rising from the ground, the centerpiece of the sculpture, and from a distance the arm looked to be covered in woven, sculpted vines. I didn't know it at the time, but I was wrong. After a closer look, months later, I instead saw 1,000 or more smaller hands clinging to the larger one. The tension in each hand, tendons strained, veins bulging from bony fingers, spoke to the implied horrors of unconscionable evil and the life and death fight of Jews to escape the Holocaust. I arrived at the memorial with burdens that night, rudderless, adrift on waves to nowhere. Months prior, I learned that I am Jewish via an ancestry DNA test. I stood at the memorial, sought it out in fact, at a frustrating stalemate as I sought an explanation for it. In the absence of an explanation, I'd perhaps ridden to the Holocaust Memorial looking for a place, somewhere to be, to bring along an identity that had undoubtedly become mine, yet still felt like someone else's. And in the presence of structures built to remind Jews and Gentiles of this human abomination, I felt an odd comfort. Maybe it was the quiet of solitude, or just as simply, maybe it was the first place in weeks where my mind could quiet and just be, albeit in a subdued state of horror because of what the place represented. For a night, time slowed. I allowed myself to be equal parts untethered and anchored, disjointed from who I was, and conscious of who I in fact always was. A week later, I gained a degree of clarity in learning how I became Jewish, and if you've been following this blog, you know how. I was donor conceived, according to my parents, and my presumed donor was, or is, an Ashkenazi Jew. And ever since, the identity of that donor has been the loose thread in my story, albeit one that I knew I could weave back together in time. 2 weeks ago, I stepped boldly and blindly forward in an attempt to tie off that thread once and for all. 5 weeks before that, or really just a few days before I did the last video here, I received an email from a writer at the New York Times inquiring about this very blog and video series and my quest to name my donor, or more specifically, the alleged fertility doctor. Our conversation set off a chain of events that have me on the cusp of confirming once and for all his identity. Now, as a side note, a call from the New York Times felt so expected to me that instead of responding, I Googled her name to confirm she wasn't a fraud and or a Nigerian prince attempting to scam me through a PayPal scheme. I imagine my surprise when I learned she was in fact legit. In short, here are the important details. Number 1, I was introduced to a woman named Eve Wiley, who has gained a degree of underground celebrity for being A, a donor child of her fertility doctor, and B, a leader in the passage of fertility fraud legislation at the state level throughout the US. Number 2, she turned me in the direction of a team of search angels, who are essentially expert DNA family tree genealogists who help people like me piece together the missing pieces of their heritage. Number 3, this group called DNA Angels, the family tree DNA genealogist whom she referred me to, immediately responded to my inquiry for help on Monday, April 19th. They accessed my Ancestry account that night, asked questions about what I thought I knew, and were in fact able to confirm a 5th-generation DNA connection to my alleged donor by the following morning. Now, this is the last point, number 4. With a history of Jewish intermarrying and 4 missing generations, many likely due, unfortunately, to the Holocaust, it became clear to them that I'd need a close relative of my donor to take a DNA test if I were to learn more. In the spirit of honesty, I can admit that nerve would have otherwise stopped me here, right at this point. But in that same message from these search angels, they had told me that they'd tracked down a name and a current phone number for one of the fertility doctor's known children. If I had been serious about uncovering the donor's identity, and I thought that I was now face to face with an opportunity to test just how serious I actually was. I took thoughts of that phone number to bed that night, hopefully naive that rest might prove a useful tool to clear my mind and reveal the depths of my intentions. At 11:45 a.m. the next morning, on April 20th, I dialed the number. I fully expected to hear a voice message. Instead, on the 3rd ring, a woman answered. Whatever message I had prepared, and thankfully the DNA angels had guided me a bit, it was going to be delivered live, for better or worse. I introduced myself, and in my quasi-prepared message, I shared the reason for my call. I was honest, though not to the extent that I showed all my cards. I explained I was donor conceived and seeking the identity of my donor, true, and that my search angels believed we might be at least first cousins. Not untrue, but my request to her was this, that she would take an Ancestry DNA test, if she were comfortable, to help me confirm the identity of my donor. She said she didn't have any objections, even after I encouraged her to take a day or so to think about it if she needed to, which she said she would. We hung up no more than 10 minutes later. What I haven't accounted for at any point in the past 4 years is that I might have a phone call like this, and that the person on the other side of the line would be so warm, kind, and earnest. If I am right, though, I have now unwittingly allowed myself to blow up the life of a complete stranger in the process, and that feeling didn't sit well with me at all. Less than 2 hours later, I got a text message from her. Hi, David. I'm hoping you're doing well after our conversation. I think I've done some internet sleuthing and found your blog. I'd love to keep talking. I'm fairly certain I know who your dad is. I may have replied with what appeared to be a sense of cool. In a literal sense, I said, I'm grateful you reached back out. I perhaps held back on sharing all of my thoughts or ideas because getting my call was probably enough all at once. I'd love to keep talking as well, at your discretion. I thought I sounded cool, but she had found this blog, these videos, the same ones you're reading, listening to. And her first instinct wasn't to call me crazy, but instead to suggest the opposite. We agreed to FaceTime each other at 5:30 p.m. that night. Sit tight, I have more coming. This does get better, and it does get juicier. We're a step closer.